Blood trickled down Jasmine's face as Officer Calloway pressed his knee into her back. Her fire radio crackled urgently. "Washington, where are you? Chief Edwards' house is engulfed in flames. His daughter is trapped inside." The racist cop who'd detained her had no idea whose life hung in balance. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of skin color. Now, let's uncover how a dedicated firefighter found herself beaten on the ground while lives were at stake. The harsh buzz of the alarm clock pierced the early morning darkness as Jasmine Washington reluctantly peeled her eyes open at 4:30. At 33 years old, she had perfected her pre-shift routine down to the minute, knowing that as one of only 3 black female firefighters in Westbrook City's department, she couldn't afford to give anyone reason to question her dedication. The weight of having to be twice as good just to be considered equal had been her reality since joining the force 7 years ago. Jasmine swung her legs over the side of the bed, her athletic frame moving with the practiced efficiency that had helped her graduate at the top of her fire academy class, despite the whispers that she was only there to fill a quota. The small 2-bedroom house she shared with her grandmother in East Westbrook was quiet except for the soft hum of the oxygen machine in the adjacent room. Before even thinking about her own needs, Jasmine padded quietly to check on Grandma Gloria, the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 8 years old. "Morning, Grandma," she whispered, adjusting the older woman's blanket and checking her oxygen levels. Gloria Washington had been Jasmine's rock, the one who had dried her tears when classmates had called her names, the one who had worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, and the one who had pushed her to follow her dreams, even when the dam's world seemed determined to hold her back. "You go save some lives today, baby." Gloria mumbled sleepily, her weathered hand squeezing Jasmine's with surprising strength. "And don't let those fools get to you." Jasmine smiled, leaning down to kiss her grandmother's forehead. "Never do, Grandma, never do." After a quick shower, Jasmine dressed in her station clothes, a simple navy t-shirt with Westbrook Fire Department emblazoned across the back and durable work pants. She ate a protein-packed breakfast, knowing from experience that emergency calls could mean missing meals. As she drove her modest sedan through the still dark streets toward Station 17, Jasmine mentally prepared for the day ahead. Station 17 was located in the heart of Westbrook, serving both the affluent North Side neighborhoods and the predominantly black and Hispanic East Side where Jasmine had grown up. The station house came into view, a 2-story red brick building with 3 bay doors for their engines and rescue vehicles. Pulling into her designated spot, Jasmine nodded to Davis Chen, another early arriver who was checking equipment outside. "Morning, Washington," he called with a genuine smile. Davis had been one of the first to treat her like just another firefighter, rather than some diversity initiative. "Chen," she acknowledged with a small smile. "Lieutenant Rodriguez here." Yet Chen rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Been here since 3, troubleshooting the backup generator. You know how he gets." Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran and the heart of their station. He'd taken Jasmine under his wing from day one, recognizing her talent and determination. Inside the station, Jasmine found most of her shift already preparing for the day. She headed to her locker, passing the kitchen where firefighter Brendan Sullivan was brewing coffee. "Made it strong just how you like it, Washington," he said, sliding a mug her way. Sullivan was decent enough, though he occasionally let slip microaggressions he didn't even recognize as problematic. "Thanks," she said, simply taking the offered coffee. The shift briefing was led by Lieutenant Rodriguez, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. "Washington, you're leading the community outreach at East Westbrook Elementary this afternoon. Take Diaz with you, show him the ropes." Jasmine nodded, secretly pleased. The community outreach program had been her initiative aimed at building trust between first responders and minority neighborhoods. Working with the kids was always the highlight of her week. Rookie firefighter Carlos Diaz beamed at the assignment, clearly eager to learn from her. The morning proceeded with equipment checks, training drills, and a minor call-out to a kitchen fire that they quickly contained. Through it all, Jasmine moved with confidence born from years of proving herself. Yet the memories of her struggle through the fire academy still lingered. She remembered the accidental shoves in the hallway, finding her gear soaked before training exercises, and the instructor who had seemed determined to see her fail. "You think a little girl like you can drag a 200-pound man out of a burning building," he'd sneered during one particularly grueling drill. Jasmine had not only completed the drill, but had done it faster than any of her male classmates. She'd graduated top of her class, but the battle hadn't ended there. Westbrook itself was a city divided with ongoing tensions between the predominantly white police department and the minority communities they served. Just last month, there had been protests after a black teenager was shot by police during a traffic stop. Jasmine had watched the news coverage with a heavy heart, recognizing that the uniform she wore with pride was viewed with suspicion by many in her own community. The station alarm blared, suddenly cutting through her thoughts. "Structure fire, North Westbrook, 721 Oakwood Drive." Possible persons trapped inside, the dispatcher's voice announced over the intercom. Jasmine and her team moved into immediate action, donning their turnout gear and boarding the engine with practiced speed. It was only as they pulled out of the station's sirens wailing that Jasmine realized she didn't yet recognize the significance of the address they were racing toward, unaware that this call would change her life forever. Engine 17 tore through the streets of Westbrook, its sirens cutting through the afternoon air, as Jasmine secured her helmet and mentally prepared for the scene ahead. Lieutenant Rodriguez was at the wheel, his face set in concentration as he navigated the fastest route to North Westbrook. 721 Oakwood, he muttered. "That's in the Hillcrest neighborhood." The upscale area was home to many of the city's elite, including several city officials and business leaders. Jasmine checked her oxygen tank and mask one final time as Davis Chen readied the medical kit beside her. The radio crackled with updates from dispatch. "Be advised, Engine 17 reports indicate fire has spread to second floor. Neighbor confirms homeowner's teenage daughter may be inside." Jasmine felt her heart rate quicken, the familiar surge of adrenaline sharpening her focus. Saving lives was why she'd become a firefighter, despite all the obstacles society had placed in her path. As they turned onto Maple Avenue, a main thoroughfare connecting East Westbrook to the northern neighborhoods, a police cruiser suddenly pulled out in front of them, lights flashing. Rodriguez slammed on the brakes, the fire engine lurching to a halt that sent equipment sliding. "What the hell?" he growled, hitting the horn. Through the windshield, Jasmine recognized the officer emerging from the cruiser. Richard Calloway, a 41-year-old patrol officer with a reputation for targeting minorities. She'd had run-ins with him before, during emergency responses always unpleasant. Calloway sauntered toward the driver's side, deliberately taking his time, despite the emergency lights and sirens. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon, an unnecessary show of authority. "Where's the fire, boys?" he asked with a smirk, deliberately ignoring Jasmine's presence. Lieutenant Rodriguez was livid. "We have an active structure fire with a child, possibly trapped, officer. We need to get through now." Calloway's eyes drifted lazily over the engine until they landed on Jasmine, his expression hardening. "Routine traffic stop. Need to see your license and registration." Rodriguez exploded. "Are you kidding me? We're an emergency vehicle responding to a life-threatening situation." The radio squawked again. "Engine 17, what's your ETA? Fire is spreading rapidly." Rodriguez made a split-second decision. "Washington, take the secondary response vehicle and bring the specialty equipment. We can't wait any longer." He turned back to Calloway. "Move your vehicle now, or I'm driving around it and reporting you to your superiors." Something in Rodriguez's tone must have reached Calloway, because he stepped back, though his eyes remained fixed on Jasmine with unmistakable malice. "Go on, then. But she stays until I've completed my inspection." Rodriguez hesitated, clearly torn between the emergency ahead and leaving Jasmine to deal with Calloway. "Go," Lieutenant Jasmine insisted. "I'll be right behind you with the equipment." With obvious reluctance, Rodriguez pulled away as soon as Calloway moved his cruiser, leaving Jasmine to unload the station's secondary response SUV parked nearby. She worked quickly, loading the specialized extraction equipment and additional oxygen tanks they might need for a rescue operation. Calloway watched her every move, making no effort to hide his contempt. "In an awful hurry, aren't we?" he drawled deliberately, stepping into her path. Jasmine kept her voice even professional. "Officer Calloway, I'm responding to an emergency situation. Please allow me to do my job." She attempted to move past him with an equipment case, but he shifted to block her. "Your job? Don't you mean the job you stole from a qualified white man because of affirmative action?" The naked racism in his tone made her stomach clench, but Jasmine maintained her composure. "Sir, there is a child in danger. Whatever issues you have with me can wait." She tried again to move toward the vehicle, but Calloway grabbed her arm roughly. "I'll decide what can wait. I need to inspect that equipment." Jasmine knew her rights as a first responder. "Officer, I am legally authorized to proceed to an emergency scene without delay. Please remove your hand." Her radio crackled urgently. "Washington, where are you with that equipment? We've got a fully involved structure now. Second floor access is compromised." Calloway's grip tightened painfully. "Sounds like your equipment needs inspection to me. Could be dangerous. Public safety concern." His free hand keyed his own radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at Maple and Oak. Got an uncooperative firefighter refusing to comply with safety inspection." Jasmine felt a cold dread settling in her stomach as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just harassment. Calloway was deliberately preventing her from responding to an emergency. As she looked into his cold blue eyes, she saw not just prejudice, but something more dangerous. A man willing to put lives at risk to exercise power over someone he deemed inferior. In that moment, as her radio continued to blare urgent requests for the equipment she carried, Jasmine realized she was caught in a nightmare scenario where doing her duty and protecting herself might be impossible to reconcile. The situation escalated with frightening speed as Officer Calloway invaded Jasmine's personal space, his breath hot against her face. "I said, set down that equipment for inspection." He snarled his hand, moving to his belt where his taser and firearm were holstered. Jasmine tried once more to reason with him, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite the growing knot of fear in her stomach. "Officer, I understand you want to inspect the equipment, but a child's life is at stake. Can we please do this after I deliver these supplies to my team?" Calloway's face contorted with rage, as if her reasonable request was the greatest insult. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." "Put down the equipment now," he shouted, spraying spittle on her face. Jasmine slowly lowered the extraction tools to the ground, trying to calculate how much longer she could afford to be delayed. Her radio continued to blare urgent messages. "Washington, we need that equipment now. The stairs are starting to collapse." The desperation in Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice tore at her. A second police cruiser pulled up, and Officer Parker stepped out. Jasmine felt a momentary surge of hope, only to have it crushed when Parker immediately took position beside Calloway, hand on his holster, without questioning the situation. "This one giving you trouble?" Rick Parker asked, eyeing Jasmine with the same contempt. "Just another entitled one who thinks her job makes her special," Calloway replied, as if Jasmine wasn't standing right there. She tried appealing to the new officer. "Officer Parker, I'm responding to a structure fire with potential casualties. My team is waiting for this life-saving equipment." Parker merely shrugged. "Should have thought of that before disrespecting an officer of the law." Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Disrespecting? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to do my job." That's when Calloway snapped. Hands against the vehicle. Now, when Jasmine hesitated, torn between compliance and her duty to respond to the emergency, Calloway grabbed her shoulder and spun her around with excessive force. Before she could regain her balance, he slammed her against the side of the SUV, pressing her cheek hard against the hot metal. "I said, hands against the vehicle. You deaf as well as stupid," Calloway growled, kicking her feet apart. "I'm complying, Officer Jasmine," said her voice steady, despite the pain shooting through her shoulder and face. "There's no need for force." Calloway responded by wrenching her arms behind her back, applying the handcuffs so tight that they immediately bit into her skin. Shut your mouth. You're under arrest for obstruction, resisting, and disorderly conduct. The equipment cases Jasmine had been carrying now lay scattered across the street, critical tools that could mean the difference between life and death at the fire scene. A small crowd of bystanders had gathered, several with phones raised recording the incident. Jasmine could hear murmurs of disapproval, but no one intervened. "Please," Jasmine tried again, the desperation creeping into her voice despite her efforts to remain calm. "Check with my lieutenant. I'm responding to a fire at 721 Oakwood Drive. There's a child trapped inside." Officer Parker kicked one of the equipment cases aside as he circled them. "Should have thought about that before you decided to play the race card, sweetheart." Jasmine hadn't mentioned race once, but the implication was clear in Parker's sneer. Calloway yanked her away from the vehicle, nearly lifting her off her feet by the handcuffs. The pain was excruciating as the metal cut deeper into her wrists. "You think that uniform gives you special privileges. You think you're better than me." Each question was punctuated by a painful jerk of the cuffs. Jasmine bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. Her radio, now on the ground beside the scattered equipment, continued to broadcast increasingly frantic calls for assistance. "Washington, where are you? We've got a victim confirmed on the second floor." "We need that equipment now." Calloway deliberately stepped on the radio, silencing it under his boot with a crack of breaking plastic. Then he grabbed Jasmine by her hair, yanking her head back. "When I give you an order, you obey immediately. Is that clear?" Before she could answer, he slammed her forward against the patrol car. Pain exploded across her face as her cheekbone and forehead connected with the hard surface. Warm blood began trickling down from a cut above her eye. "Stop resisting," Calloway shouted, though Jasmine had been completely compliant. It was a tactic she'd seen before, creating a false narrative to justify brutality. Through the ringing in her ears, Jasmine heard more sirens in the distance. For a moment, she thought help might be arriving, until she realized it was just more police responding to Calloway's call for backup. As Calloway roughly searched her, his hands lingering inappropriately, Jasmine felt a surge of helpless rage. Not just for herself, but for the person who might be dying because she couldn't deliver the equipment. "My name is Jasmine Washington," she said, loudly aware of the recording bystanders. "I am a firefighter with Westbrook Fire Department, responding to an emergency call. I have not resisted or obstructed in any way. I need medical attention and to be released to perform my duties." Calloway responded by jerking her away from the car and throwing her to the ground, driving his knee into her back as he had done with countless other black citizens. Her face scraped against the rough asphalt. "Shut up, you'll speak when spoken to." Through the pain and the pressure on her back, making it difficult to breathe, Jasmine could hear her radio crackling nearby. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came through, broken but clear enough. "Washington, where are you? Chief Edwards' house is engulfed in flames. His daughter is trapped inside in that terrible moment." As Officer Calloway pressed his knee harder into her back and blood trickled down her face, Jasmine realized whose home was burning. Marcus Edwards, the first black police chief in Westbrook's history, a man who had been pushing for reforms against resistance from officers exactly like Calloway. And now his daughter's life hung in the balance because of a racist cop's vendetta against a black firefighter. Do you think Officer Calloway would have treated Jasmine differently if she were white? Comment number 1, if you believe this kind of racial profiling happens in real life, or number 2, if you think this is exaggerated. Either way, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that expose the harsh realities many face every day. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination from someone who should have been protecting you? What would you do if you were in Jasmine's impossible situation, torn between following orders from a hostile officer and saving a Pacan life? Let me know in the comments as we continue to follow Jasmine's harrowing experience and see what happens at Chief Edwards' burning home. Flames licked hungrily at the second-story windows of the stately colonial home at 721 Oakwood Drive, dark smoke billowing ominously against the clear blue sky. Inside, the temperature had already climbed well above 400 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the once elegant home into a deadly inferno. Engine 17 had arrived 7 minutes ago, But without the specialized equipment, Jasmine was supposed to deliver Lieutenant Rodriguez, and his team were fighting a losing battle. Where the hell is Washington with that equipment? Rodriguez shouted over the roar of the flames, his face streaked with soot beneath his helmet visor. Davis Chen shook his head, his expression grim behind his breathing apparatus. Still no radio contact. Something's wrong, Lieutenant. She should have been right behind us. Rodriguez cursed under his breath. This wasn't like Jasmine at all. She was the most reliable firefighter on his team, often the first to arrive at a scene, never one to delay during an emergency. A crowd had gathered behind the hastily established perimeter neighbors in designer athleisure wear, watching in horror as the home of Police Chief Marcus Edwards burned. Among them stood City Councilwoman Patricia Moore and Judge William Harris, both recording the scene on their phones, both noticing the apparently understaffed and under-equipped fire response. At 58 years old, Chief Marcus Edwards had built a distinguished 30-year career in law enforcement, rising through the ranks despite the systemic racism that had repeatedly tried to block his advancement. As Westbrook's first black police chief appointed 3 years ago, he had been working to implement reforms that had earned him enemies within his own department, particularly among old guard officers like Richard Calloway, who resented taking orders from a black man. Edwards wasn't home when the fire started an electrical short in the aging wiring of the historic house, but his 16-year-old daughter Maya was. Homesick from school, she had been sleeping in her second-floor bedroom when the smoke detector's shrill alarm jolted her awake. Now, Maya Edwards was trapped in the bathroom, a damp towel pressed against the crack under the door, as she had been taught, but the smoke was growing thicker by the minute, seeping through every crevice. She had already vomited twice from smoke inhalation, her lungs burning, her vision beginning to blur. "Help," she screamed, her voice growing weaker. "Please, somebody help me." Outside, Rodriguez and his team had established a water line and were desperately trying to contain the blaze, but without the thermal imaging equipment and specialized extraction tools Jasmine was bringing, couldn't safely reach the second floor to search for the girl. "Chief." A voice called out, and Fire Department Captain Wilson strode up, his expression thunderous. At 62, Wilson had seen it all in his 40-year career, but the sight of his crew struggling without proper equipment during a rescue operation made his blood boil. Where the hell is the secondary response team? Where's the extraction equipment? Rodriguez wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a smear of ash. Washington was bringing it. Something's held her up. Wilson grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, what's the status on Firefighter Washington and the secondary response vehicle?" The reply came back garbled but clear enough. Last contact with Washington was 20 minutes ago when stopped by police on Maple Avenue. No further communication. Wilson's face darkened. Police stopped her. During an emergency response, he turned to Rodriguez. "Keep working the fire. I'm going to find out what the hell is going on." Just then, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the perimeter, and Chief Marcus Edwards leaped out, his normally composed face contorted with fear as he took in the scene of his burning home. "Maya," he shouted, rushing toward the house, only to be intercepted by 2 firefighters. "Chief Edwards, you can't go in there. My daughter's in there." Edwards struggled against their restraining arms, his eyes wild with panic. "We're doing everything we can, sir," one of the firefighters assured him, though the doubt in his eyes betrayed the truth. Without the proper equipment, their options were severely limited. Captain Wilson approached Edwards quickly. "Chief, we're working to contain the fire and reach your daughter, but we're missing critical equipment." Edwards, still struggling to process the scene before him, latched onto this information. "Missing equipment? What do you mean? Where is it?" Wilson's jaw tightened. "One of my firefighters was bringing it, but was apparently stopped by police. We've lost contact with her." Police, Edwards echoed, momentarily distracted from his panic by this bewildering information. Why would police stop a firefighter during an emergency response? Before Wilson could respond, a shout went up from the house. The second floor had partially collapsed, sending a shower of burning debris onto the front lawn. A window on the second floor shattered from the heat, and through the new opening, they could hear Maya's weakening cries for help. Edwards broke free from the firefighters and ran toward the house again, only to be tackled to the ground by Rodriguez. "You can't help her by dying, Chief," the lieutenant shouted. "We need that equipment. Without the thermal imaging and breathing apparatus, we can't reach the second floor safely." Edwards lay on the ground, watching helplessly as his home burned with his only child trapped inside. His wife had died from breast cancer 3 years ago, leaving Maya as his entire world. The thought of losing her was unbearable. As if summoned by his desperation, more sirens wailed in the distance. Another fire engine from Station 23 was responding for backup, but Edwards knew it might be too late. Every second that passed reduced Maya's chances of survival. The toxic smoke would overcome her long before the flames reached her. At the edge of the gathering crowd, Councilwoman Moore was on her phone. "Yes, I'm watching it right now. The fire department seems completely unprepared. No, they're saying some equipment is missing. I don't know, but this looks like gross incompetence to me." Her words carried to Captain Wilson, who shot her a venomous look before turning back to Edwards. "Chief, do you know which officers might have stopped my firefighter? We need to get that equipment here now." Edwards pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed the police dispatch. "This is Chief Edwards. I need to know which officers responded to a stop involving a firefighter on Maple Avenue in the last 30 minutes. He listened for a moment, his expression changing from desperate to confused to furious in the space of seconds. "Calloway and Parker. Get me Calloway on the radio now." While Edwards tried to reach his officer, Rodriguez was coordinating with the newly arrived backup engine. "We need to vent the roof," he instructed, "and prepare for a rescue attempt with what we've got. We can't wait any longer." Everyone knew what he wasn't saying. Without the proper equipment, whoever went in was taking a terrible risk. The roof team moved into position with axes and saws, preparing to cut ventilation holes to release some of the heat and smoke. On the ground, Edwards finally got through to the police dispatcher again. "What do you mean? He's processing an arrest." "What arrest?" "Put him on now." The response made Edwards' blood run cold. According to dispatch, Officer Calloway had arrested a combative black female firefighter who was resisting inspection of emergency equipment. As the full picture began to emerge, Edwards realized with horrifying clarity that his daughter's life was now hanging by a thread because one of his own officers had detained a firefighter responding to his home. And not just any officer, but Richard Calloway, a man Edwards had reprimanded just last month for excessive force complaints against minority citizens. As this devastating realization washed over him, Edwards heard Maya's voice again, now barely audible over the roar of the fire. "Daddy, help me." The sound of his daughter's weakening pleas cut through everything else, a knife to his heart. Captain Wilson placed a hand on Edwards' shoulder. "Chief, we're going to do everything humanly possible to save your daughter." But both men knew that everything humanly possible might not be enough without the equipment that Officer Calloway was at this very moment preventing from reaching them. The fluorescent lights of the Westbrook police station buzzed overhead as Officer Calloway roughly shoved Jasmine through the double doors of the precinct. Blood had dried on her face, and her wrists were raw and bleeding where the 2 tight handcuffs had cut into her skin during the transport. "Got a live one here," Calloway announced loudly to the booking officer, a balding man in his 50s who barely looked up from his computer. "Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct." Each false charge made Jasmine's stomach twist with indignation, but she remained silent, knowing from bitter experience that protesting would only make things worse. The booking officer, Sergeant Frank Miller, finally glanced up, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Jasmine's bloodied face and firefighter uniform. "She do all that in uniform?" he asked, a note of skepticism in his voice. Calloway shrugged. "Playing the hero card doesn't exempt anyone from following police orders. She got physical when I tried to inspect her vehicle." It was a blatant lie, but Miller merely nodded and began the booking process, photographing Jasmine's injuries as if they were evidence against her rather than evidence of police brutality. Jasmine's thoughts weren't on her own situation, however. All she could think about was the fire and the trapped girl whose life might depend on the equipment Calloway had prevented her from delivering. "I need to make a phone call," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm a first responder interrupted during an emergency. My team needs to know where I am and where the equipment—" Island Calloway laughed. "You'll get your phone call when I say you get it, not before." Miller at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Rick, she is a firefighter. Maybe we should." Calloway cut him off with a glare. "She's a perp now, Frank. Uniform doesn't change that. Process her like anyone else." As Jasmine was fingerprinted and her personal items confiscated, she noticed a young officer watching from across the room. Officer James Diaz, a rookie who couldn't be more than 25, was observing the proceedings with obvious discomfort. His dark eyes troubled as they met Jasmine's briefly before darting away. The station was unusually busy for a weekday afternoon, with officers moving purposefully between desks, some casting curious glances at the handcuffed firefighter, but none intervening. After booking, Calloway personally escorted Jasmine to a holding cell, gripping her arm painfully tight. "You should have just stayed in your lane," he muttered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "People like you, thinking you can wear a uniform and be equal. You'll never be equal." He shoved her into the cell, causing her to stumble and fall hard onto the concrete floor. "Oops," he said, with a smirk, closing the cell door with a clang that echoed through the small space. Left alone, Jasmine finally allowed herself a moment of despair. Her shoulders shook as silent tears mixed with the dried blood on her face. She wasn't crying for herself, but for the girl who might be dying because she couldn't deliver the equipment. For her team, who were likely risking their lives without proper tools, for a system so broken that a racist cop could endanger lives with impunity just to exercise power over someone who looked like her. Across the station, Officer Calloway sat at his desk, typing up his report with 2 fingers, fabricating a narrative that bore little resemblance to reality. In his version, Jasmine had become belligerent when asked for identification, had refused a lawful order to submit to equipment inspection, and had physically resisted when he attempted to detain her. It was a story he had written dozens of times before with different names, but the same basic plot: black suspect resists officer forced to use appropriate force. The system had protected him every time. Officer Parker stood nearby, adding details to strengthen the narrative. "Should we mention how she kept playing the race card?" he suggested. "Good thinking," Calloway agreed, adding another fabricated quote to his report. Neither man seemed concerned about potential video evidence from bystanders. They knew from experience that the department would close ranks around them, dismissing outside video as lacking context or edited to inflame tensions. This wasn't Calloway's first excessive force complaint. His personnel file contained at least 7 previous incidents involving minority citizens, all of which had been dismissed or buried by internal affairs. His reputation within the department was split. Some officers avoided working with him, while others, particularly older white officers, considered him old school and not afraid to get his hands dirty. Rebecca Winters, the department's public information officer, was already crafting a statement in anticipation of the cell phone videos hitting social media. A polished woman in her 40s, with a background in corporate PR, Winters specialized in language that sounded objective while subtly supporting the department's perspective. The Westbrook Police Department is aware of videos circulating on social media showing an interaction between officers and a firefighter. While these clips may appear concerning when viewed without context, we ask the public to reserve judgment until our investigation is complete. Our officers followed standard procedures when confronted with an individual who was obstructing an inspection. Down the hall, Officer Diaz approached the break room where several other officers were gathered, their attention fixed on the television mounted on the wall. A local news station was showing live coverage of a major house fire in North Westbrook. Firefighters appear to be struggling to contain the blaze at Police Chief Edwards' residence, where sources tell us his teenage daughter may be trapped inside. Diaz froze the coffee mug in his hand, nearly slipping from his grasp. "Wait, that's Chief Edwards' house?" he asked, his voice cracking. The other officers turned to look at him, some with expressions of genuine concern, others with carefully neutral faces that revealed nothing. "Yeah, sounds like his kid might not make it out," said Officer Thompson, a veteran with 20 years on the force. "Shame. Edwards is a pain in the ass with all his reform talk, but nobody deserves to lose a kid." Diaz's mind was racing, connecting dots that painted a horrifying picture. The firefighter Calloway just brought in. She said she was responding to an emergency, that she had equipment they needed. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Thompson's face paled slightly. "You sure about that?" Rookie Diaz nodded, feeling sick. She was in uniform, had blood all over her face. Calloway said she was resisting, but she looked more scared than anything. She kept saying they needed her at a fire scene. Another officer, Stevens, stood up abruptly. "Keep your mouth shut, Diaz. This isn't your business." But Diaz couldn't let it go. If she was bringing equipment they needed to save the chief's daughter, and Calloway stopped her. Thompson cut him off. "Listen to me very carefully, Rookie. Whatever happened out there is between Calloway and that firefighter. Department takes care of its own. You start running your mouth, your career is over before it starts." "Got it." The threat was clear, but so was the moral imperative. Diaz set down his coffee mug and walked out without another word, his decision already made. Back in the holding cell, Jasmine heard snippets of conversation from passing officers enough to piece together that the fire was at Chief Edwards' home and that his daughter was in serious danger. The knowledge was a physical pain in her chest. If anything happened to that girl because she couldn't deliver the equipment, the sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. Officer Calloway returned, opening the cell door with a jangling of keys. "Looks like it's your lucky day," he said, though his expression suggested he felt otherwise. "Captain's ordered your release." Jasmine stood carefully, her body aching from the assault. "The fire at Chief Edwards' house, is everyone okay?" Calloway's face twisted into something ugly. "Worried about your new best friend, the chief?" "Yeah, I just found out whose house that was. Typical. You people always sticking together." He grabbed her arm again, fingers digging into the same bruised spot as before. "Let's go. Your fire captain is raising hell in the lobby." As Calloway led her through the station, Jasmine noticed the atmosphere had changed. Officers who had ignored her earlier now watched with wary eyes. Some looked away guiltily when she met their gaze. In the lobby, Captain Wilson was indeed raising hell, his face red with fury, as he confronted the desk sergeant. "There she is," Wilson exclaimed when he saw Jasmine rushing to her side and gently taking her arm from Calloway's grasp. "My God, Washington, what did they do to you?" Before she could answer, Wilson turned on Calloway, jabbing a finger at the officer's chest. "You detained a firefighter responding to an emergency. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Calloway took a step back for the first time, looking uncertain. "I was conducting a legitimate inspection." Wilson cut him off. "Save it for your superiors. Right now I'm taking my firefighter to get medical attention, and then we're going to have a very long conversation with the chief about this." As Wilson guided her toward the exit, Jasmine finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "The fire. Chief Edwards' daughter, is she?" Wilson's expression told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "They got her out, but just barely. She's on her way to the hospital now. Critical condition from smoke inhalation." The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. If she had been able to deliver the equipment on time, if Calloway hadn't detained her, maybe that girl wouldn't be fighting for her life right now. As they stepped outside the station, Jasmine was surprised to see a small crowd had gathered, some holding hastily made signs reading "Justice for Firefighter Washington" and "End Police Racism." Word had spread fast, likely through the bystander videos. Among the crowd, Jasmine spotted her brother Terrell and her grandmother Gloria, who rushed forward as soon as they saw her, enveloping her in a careful embrace. "Baby, what did they do to you?" Gloria whispered, her weathered hands gently touching Jasmine's injured face. Jasmine couldn't answer, her throat too tight with emotion. Over her grandmother's shoulder, she saw Officer Diaz exit the station, his young face troubled as their eyes met briefly. In that moment of connection, Jasmine recognized an ally, someone whose conscience wouldn't allow him to stay silent about what had happened. What she didn't yet realize was that her ordeal had only just begun, that powerful forces within the police department were already moving to protect Calloway and discredit her. Nor could she know that across town, as doctors fought to save Maya Edwards' life, her father was learning exactly why the equipment that might have saved his daughter without incident had never arrived at his burning home. Word of the dual tragedies spread through Westbrook like wildfire. igniting long, simmering tensions between the community and police department. By nightfall, the scene outside Westbrook General Hospital had transformed into an impromptu vigil, with dozens of people gathering with candles and handmade signs supporting both Maya Edwards and Jasmine Washington. Inside, 16-year-old Maya lay unconscious in the ICU, a ventilator breathing for her as doctors worked to treat the severe smoke inhalation that had damaged her lungs. Down the hall, Jasmine sat on an examination table as a doctor carefully cleaned the cuts on her face and wrists, documenting each injury with photographs for what everyone knew would become a legal case. The local news had picked up the story with reporter Aisha Johnson from Channel 8 standing outside the hospital for a live broadcast. Behind me, community members continue to gather as we await updates on Maya Edwards, daughter of Police Chief Marcus Edwards, who remains in critical condition following today's house fire. In a shocking development, sources tell us that crucial rescue equipment was delayed from reaching the scene because a black female firefighter was allegedly detained and assaulted by a Westbrook police officer during her emergency response. The camera panned to show the growing crowd before returning to Johnson's serious expression. The officer involved has been identified as Richard Calloway, a 15-year veteran with the department who has previously faced allegations of racial bias in his policing. Chief Edwards has not yet made a public statement, but city officials confirm he is with his daughter at the hospital. Across town, at the Greater Hope Baptist Church in East Westbrook, Reverend James Wallace was addressing a hastily assembled community meeting. The historic black church was packed with people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the steps outside. Today, we witnessed the cost of systemic racism in our city. Reverend Wallace's powerful voice resonated through the sanctuary. A dedicated public servant was prevented from doing her life-saving work solely because of the color of her skin, and a young girl now fights for her life as a result. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But we will not respond with violence. Wallace continued raising his hands for emphasis. We will respond with unity, with determination, with righteous demands for justice that cannot be ignored. Among those present was Terrell Washington, Jasmine's older brother who had left their grandmother at the hospital to represent the family. A respected high school math teacher, Terrell had always been Jasmine's fiercest defender. "My sister has dedicated her life to saving others," he told the assembly, his voice tight with emotion. Today, she was prevented from doing that by the very people who are supposed to protect and serve our community. This isn't just about Jasmine, it's about a system that sees our skin color as a threat no matter what uniform we wear. Outside the police station, a different kind of gathering was taking place. What had started as a small protest had grown to several hundred people chanting "Justice for Jasmine and Fire Calloway now." The diverse crowd included people of all races and ages, many filming with their phones as police in riot gear formed a line in front of the station entrance. Mayor Henderson watched the live stream from his office, his political instincts telling him this situation could define or end his career. A moderate who had won election with support from both business interests and minority communities, Henderson had carefully avoided taking strong positions on police reform. That middle ground was rapidly disappearing beneath his feet. His phone rang again, the fifth call in as many minutes from Councilwoman Patricia Moore, who had witnessed the fire response firsthand. "Patricia, I was just about to call you back," Henderson lied smoothly. "Have you seen what's happening downtown?" Moore demanded without preamble. "This is exactly what I've been warning about for years. The police department is out of control, and now we have a firefighter assaulted and the chief's daughter in critical condition." Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples. "We don't have all the facts yet. Let's not rush to judgment. Don't give me that political doublespeak," Moore snapped. "I was there. I saw how understaffed and under-equipped those firefighters were. And now we know why. Are you going to stand with the community on this, or hide behind an investigation while things explode?" It was the question Henderson had been dreading because there was no safe answer. Support the protesters and he'd lose the police union and conservative voters. Support the police and he'd lose the black community and progressives. Before he could formulate a response, his assistant rushed in. Sir Fire Department Captain Wilson is here demanding to see you, and Chief Edwards just called. He's asking for emergency authorization to access all body cam footage from Officers Calloway and Parker. At Westbrook, General Gloria Washington sat beside her granddaughter, her weathered hand gently stroking Jasmine's hair as a nurse finished bandaging her wrists. Despite her 81 years and the oxygen tube in her nose, Gloria's eyes burned with a fierce intensity. "Your daddy would be so proud of you," she told Jasmine softly, standing tall in the face of that evil. "But he'd also tell you this isn't your burden to carry alone." Jasmine nodded, wincing as the movement pulled at the stitches above her eye. "I keep thinking about that girl Grandma. If I'd gotten there with the equipment." Gloria squeezed her hand. "Don't you do that to yourself. This is on that officer, not you. You did everything right." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Both women looked up to see a tall, distinguished-looking black man in a rumpled suit standing in the doorway, his face etched with exhaustion and grief. "Miss Washington," he asked quietly. "I'm Marcus Edwards." Jasmine straightened immediately, recognizing the police chief despite having never met him personally. "Chief Edwards, I'm so sorry about your daughter." "How is she?" Edwards entered the room slowly, as if carrying a great weight. "Fighting. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." He glanced at Gloria, then back to Jasmine. "I needed to see you myself to understand what happened today." Before Jasmine could respond, the door opened again, and a stylish black woman in her 40s entered with purpose. "Chief Edwards, I presume I'm Alexandria Foster, Miss Washington's attorney. I'd advise my client not to discuss today's events without proper representation." Foster was one of the city's most prominent civil rights attorneys, known for taking on high-profile police misconduct cases. Jasmine looked at her in confusion. "I didn't call an attorney." "Your union did," Foster explained. "And given the circumstances, I'm glad they did." She turned to Edwards. "With all due respect, Chief, your officer assaulted my client and prevented her from performing her duties during an emergency. While I sympathize deeply with your personal situation, this conversation needs to happen with proper protections in place." Edwards nodded slowly. "I understand, Counselor, but I'm not here in an official capacity or to gather evidence against Miss Washington. I'm here as a father trying to make sense of why my daughter is fighting for her life." The raw pain in his voice silenced the room. Gloria, always sensitive to suffering, stood up with some effort. "Mr. Edwards, why don't you sit down? You look like you haven't rested in days, and it's only been hours." Edwards accepted the offered chair with a grateful nod. "Miss Washington," he began carefully, "I've reviewed the initial reports, but I'd like to hear from you, if you're willing to share what happened when Officer Calloway stopped you. Not for an investigation, but so I can understand." Foster started to object, but Jasmine raised a hand to stop her. "It's okay. I want Chief Edwards to know." Taking a deep breath, Jasmine recounted the events of the afternoon, the emergency call being separated from her team, Calloway's deliberate obstruction, the escalation to violence, and her desperate attempts to communicate the urgency of prosecute her mission. As she spoke, Edward's expression darkened his hands, clenching into fists on his knees. When she finished, the room fell into heavy silence. Officer Calloway has had 7 complaints of excessive force filed against him in the past 3 years. Edwards finally said, his voice carefully controlled. 3 of those were filed since I became chief. I've tried to address the pattern, but the union protections and resistance within the department." He trailed off, then looked directly at Jasmine. "I failed. As chief, I failed to rein in an officer who should have been removed from duty long ago. And now my daughter and you have paid the price for that failure." The raw honesty of his admission hung in the air between them. Outside the hospital room, the crowd of supporters had grown, their voices occasionally audible through the windows as they chanted for justice. Social media was flooded with the bystander videos showing Jasmine's arrest, each new share amplifying the outrage. At the fire station, Lieutenant Rodriguez and his team sat in stunned silence, replaying the day's events and their inability to reach Maya Edwards quickly without the proper equipment. The mood was somber, weighted with guilt, despite the fact that they had done everything humanly possible under the circumstances. Back at the police station, the thin blue line was beginning to fracture. While many officers closed ranks around Calloway out of instinct, others, particularly younger officers and officers of color, were openly questioning his actions and the department's response. Officer Diaz stood at a crossroads holding evidence that could contradict Calloway's official report, but knowing that coming forward could end his career before it truly began. Across the city and neighborhoods, rich and poor, black and white, the conversation was the same. How could this happen? How could a firefighter responding to an emergency be assaulted by police? How could racial bias be so deeply ingrained that Prussen hieses it would endanger the life of the police chief's own daughter? As night fell over Westbrook, the city teetered on the edge of a reckoning. In her hospital bed, Jasmine Washington had become more than just a firefighter. She had become a symbol, a catalyst for conversations too long avoided. And in the ICU, Maya Edwards' monitors beeped steadily, her young life hanging in the balance, an innocent victim of prejudice she had done nothing to invite. Has a situation like this ever happened in your community? Comment number 1. If you believe police departments need more accountability. Or number 2, if you think we need to support law enforcement during these challenging times. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to see how this powerful story unfolds. What do you think Chief Edwards will do next? Caught between his duty as police chief and his anguish as a father whose daughter is fighting for her life because of his own officer's actions. Share your thoughts below as we continue this incredible journey of courage, injustice, and the fight for change. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows across Chief Marcus Edwards' face as he strode purposefully toward the administrative offices, his badge granting him access to areas normally off-limits to visitors, especially at 2 in the morning. He hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, alternating between sitting vigil at his daughter's bedside and working his phone, pulling every string he could to gather information about what had happened. The doctors had induced a medical coma to give Maya's smoke-damaged lungs a chance to heal, and the helplessness of watching his child fight for her life had crystallized into a cold, focused determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Captain Reginald Barnes from Internal Affairs was waiting for him, a thick manila folder under his arm and a flash drive in his hand. At 52, Barnes was an old-school cop who had risen through the ranks alongside Edwards, one of the few white officers who had supported Edwards' promotion to chief. "Marcus," he said quietly, the formality of titles set aside in the empty hallway. "I pulled everything we have, body cam footage from both Calloway and Parker. The dispatcher logs. The previous complaints against Calloway. It's all here." Edwards accepted the materials with a grim nod. Conference room Barnes led him to a small meeting room used for hospital staff, setting up a laptop while Edwards closed the blinds. "Before we start," Barnes said, his voice low, "you should know the union's already involved. They've assigned counsel to Calloway, and they're pushing back hard against any disciplinary action, claiming he was following procedure for equipment inspection." Edwards' jaw tightened. "Let's see the footage." The bodycam video began playing, showing Calloway's perspective as he pulled his cruiser in front of the fire engine. From the very first interaction, it was clear that Calloway had deliberately targeted the emergency vehicle without cause, his tone confrontational as he approached Lieutenant Rodriguez. When the footage showed Rodriguez leaving with the main engine while Jasmine stayed behind with the equipment, Edwards leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the screen. What followed confirmed everything Jasmine had told him. Calloway's harassment was blatant, his racist comments clearly audible. When the physical confrontation began, Edwards flinched as if the blows were landing on his own body, watching in horror as a dedicated first responder was assaulted while trying to perform her duty. Most damning of all was the moment when Jasmine's radio crackled with the dispatcher's update about the fire at his address, followed by Calloway deliberately stepping on the radio, cutting off communication. There was no mistaking the officer's intent. "Jesus Christ," Edwards whispered, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. "He heard my address. He knew it was my house burning, and he still..." Barnes nodded grimly. "It gets worse." I pulled his text messages from his department phone. He slid a printout across the table. The exchange between Calloway and another officer made Edwards' blood run cold. Got one of those affirmative action firefighters detained. Bitch thinks the uniform makes her special. The response, make her wait. These people need to learn their place. Edwards read the messages twice, his cop instincts processing the evidence even as the father in him howled for immediate justice. Who's the other officer in these texts? Sergeant Miller. 22 years on the force. He was the booking officer when Calloway brought Washington in. Edwards stood abruptly pacing the small room as he processed what he had seen. This goes beyond Calloway. This is a culture problem. He thought of Maya lying unconscious with tubes snaking from her body, fighting for every breath. He thought of Jasmine Washington assaulted while trying to save his daughter. And he thought of his own role in perpetuating a system that had allowed this to happen. I want arrest warrants prepared for Calloway and Miller, he said finally. Charges of assault, deprivation of civil rights, under color of law, and reckless endangerment. Barnes's eyebrows shot up. Marcus, you know the union will fight this tooth and nail. The DA might not even pursue it. Then I'll go to the FBI and request a federal civil rights investigation. Edwards replied, his voice hardening. One way or another, this ends now. As dawn broke over the city, Edwards finally returned to the ICU, his mind wrestling with the impossible position he now found himself in. As chief, moving against his own officers would create a schism in the department that might never heal. But as Maya's father, how could he do anything less? The steady beep of the heart monitor greeted him as he entered Maya's room. A nurse was checking her vitals, recording numbers on a chart. Any change? Edwards asked, though he already knew the answer from the nurse's expression. Her oxygen levels are still lower than we'd like, the nurse replied gently. But she's stable. That's something. Edwards nodded, taking his place in the chair beside the bed, carefully lifting Maya's limp hand into his own. His daughter's face was partially obscured by the ventilator mask, but he could still see the resemblance to her mother that always made his heart ache with bittersweet memory. Karen had been gone for 3 years, now taken by an aggressive breast cancer that had spread before they even knew she was sick. I should have protected you, he whispered to Maya. That's my job. To protect you. But he hadn't. He had failed to reform his department, failed to remove a dangerous officer from the streets, and now his daughter was paying the price for his caution, his political calculations, his attempts to change the system from within without making too many waves. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Officer James Diaz standing awkwardly in the doorway, still in uniform but with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he too had been up all night. Chief Edwards, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to speak with you. It's important. Edwards recognized the young officer from the new recruit class he had addressed just 3 months ago. Come in, Diaz. Diaz entered hesitantly, his eyes darting to Maya's still form before focusing on Edwards. Sir, I have information about what happened yesterday. Information that contradicts Officer Calloway's official report. Edwards studied the rookie's face, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly. You understand what you're doing by coming forward. Diaz nodded. Yes, sir. I know the department doesn't look kindly on officers who break ranks, but I can't be part of this. What Calloway did. What happened to your daughter because of it? He swallowed hard. I have the station security footage. It shows Calloway bragging about detaining Washington, shows him and Parker laughing about it, even after they knew it was your house burning. The footage is supposed to be automatically deleted after 48 hours, but I copied it. He held out a small flash drive. I also have text messages he sent me trying to get me to corroborate his version of events. Edwards accepted the flash drive, turning it over in his palm. You're risking your career, you know that. With all due respect, sir, if keeping my career means covering up something like this, then it's not a career worth having. The simple integrity of the statement hit Edwards like a physical blow. How many times had he compromised his own principles in the name of working within the system, of picking his battles, of making incremental progress? How many Calloways had he allowed to remain on the force because removing them would have been too politically costly? The weight of those compromises pressed down on him, as he looked at his daughter's unconscious form. When he returned his gaze to Diaz, his decision was made. "I need you to make an official statement. Everything you saw, everything you heard. It won't be easy. The union will come after you. Other officers will consider you a traitor." Diaz straightened his shoulders. "I understand, sir. I'm ready." As Diaz left to meet with Internal Affairs, Edwards' phone buzzed with a text from Alexandria Foster. "Jasmine Washington's attorney, Miss Washington, has been released from the hospital. Press conference scheduled for noon today. Would appreciate your presence if possible." The implications were clear. This was about to become very public, very fast. Within the hour, Edwards had summoned his command staff to the hospital's conference room, the only place he was willing to meet while Maya remained in critical condition. The tension was palpable as he laid out what he had learned, showing the body cam footage and presenting the evidence Diaz had provided. "This department has failed," he told them bluntly. "Failed Miss Washington. Failed my daughter. Failed this community. And I take full responsibility for that failure." Assistant Chief Gerald Wilson, a 30-year veteran who had vocally opposed many of Edwards' reform efforts, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Chief, this is one incident with one officer who may have exercised poor judgment. We can't let this be used to smear the entire department." Edwards fixed Wilson with a cold stare. "Poor judgment. Is that what you call assault and deliberate obstruction of emergency services? Is that what you call actions that directly endangered my daughter's life?" Wilson had the grace to look away. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Edwards pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, this isn't about one bad apple. This is about a culture that protected Callaway despite 7 previous complaints. A culture where officers feel comfortable sending racist text messages from their department phones. A culture that closes, ranks instead of holding its own accountable." He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. "As of this moment, Officers Callaway and Parker are suspended without pay pending criminal charges. Sergeant Miller is under investigation. I'm implementing an immediate review of all excessive force complaints from the past 5 years, conducted by an independent panel." The announcement was met with stunned silence, broken finally by Captain Lisa Hernandez, one of the few women in command position. "The union will fight you on this. Hard." Edwards nodded. "Let them. I'd rather lose my job fighting for what's right than keep it by continuing to look the other way." As the meeting broke up, Edwards returned to Maya's bedside, arriving just as her doctor was completing an examination. Chief Edwards' Dr. Patel greeted him, her expression cautiously optimistic. "We're seeing some improvement in Maya's oxygen levels. If this continues, we may be able to reduce her sedation later today." The news, the first positive development since the nightmare began, brought tears to Edwards' eyes. "She's fighting," he said softly. "Just like her mother." Dr. Patel smiled. "She's certainly island. And so are you, from what I hear. The hospital staff is talking about how you're taking on your own department over what happened." News traveled fast in a hospital. Edwards shrugged. "I'm just doing what I should have done long ago." He sat beside Maya, gently taking her hand. "I made her a promise," he said, more to himself than to the doctor. "That justice would be served. That her suffering wouldn't be for nothing." Across town, Jasmine Washington was being released from the hospital, her grandmother and brother supporting her as she walked slowly to the car. Her face was still swollen, the stitches above her eye, a stark reminder of Callaway's brutality. News cameras captured her exit, the images broadcast live across local stations. At the police station, officers watched these broadcasts with mixed reactions. Some expressed outrage at Callaway's actions, while others worried about the department's reputation and their own job security. The thin blue line was fracturing along lines of race, age, and personal ethics. Officer Diaz sat in an interview room with Internal Affairs investigators, providing his statement in clear, precise detail. Despite his rookie status, he spoke with the moral authority of someone who knew beyond any doubt that he was doing the right thing. As morning turned to afternoon, Edwards prepared to leave the hospital briefly to attend Jasmine's press conference. Before he did, he made one more stop at Maya's bedside. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart," he promised, kissing her forehead gently. Your dad's finally doing what he should have done all along, standing up for what's right no matter the cost. I think you'd be proud." And as he walked out of the ICU toward a confrontation that would likely define the remainder of his career, Marcus Edwards felt for the first time since the fire that he was truly honoring his role as both police chief and father. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors, as Jasmine Washington stared at her reflection in the small bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable, her face swollen and discolored stitches creating a stark line above her eyebrow. Physical pain radiated from various points on her body, a constant reminder of Calloway's assault, but it was nothing compared to the psychological trauma that kept replaying in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the officer's knee in her back, heard his hateful words, and worst of all, heard the desperate radio calls for the equipment she hadn't been able to deliver. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Her brother Terrell stood in the doorway, concern etched on his features. "The doctor signed your discharge papers," he said softly. "Grandma's waiting in the hall. You ready to go home?" Jasmine nodded, though ready wasn't exactly how she felt. Nothing in her life had prepared her for suddenly becoming the center of a brewing civil rights storm. As she gathered her few belongings, her phone buzzed with yet another message from a news outlet seeking comment. The videos of her arrest had gone viral overnight, igniting outrage across the country. "Miss Washington," a new voice from the doorway made her look up. A tall, impeccably dressed black woman with close-cropped natural hair and penetrating eyes stood there radiating competence and authority. "I'm Alexandria Foster. Your firefighters' union contacted me about representing you." Jasmine recognized the name immediately. Alexandria Foster was a legend in civil rights law, having won several high-profile police brutality cases across the country. "I didn't ask for a lawyer," Jasmine said, her voice still rough from the assault. "You didn't have to," Foster replied, entering the room and setting her briefcase on the bed. "What happened to you is a clear violation of your civil rights, and there will be significant legal ramifications. You need representation, and I'm the best there, Island." There was no boasting in her tone, simply a statement of fact. Foster opened her briefcase and extracted a tablet. "I've reviewed the bystander videos and spoken with several witnesses. We have a strong case for assault, false arrest, and civil rights violations against Officer Calloway, Officer Parker, and the Westbrook Police Department as a whole." She paused, studying Jasmine's face. "But what happens next is your decision. Some clients prefer to settle quietly. Others want to fight publicly for systemic change. Given the high-profile nature of this case with Chief Edwards' daughter involved, you have significant leverage either way." Jasmine thought about Maya Edwards still fighting for her life in the ICU. She thought about her own grandmother who had lived through Jim Crow and marched with Dr. King, who had always taught her that justice required courage. She thought about every black first responder who had ever been disrespected, doubted, or endangered because of their skin color. "I want to fight," she said finally, her voice growing stronger. "Not just for me, but for everyone this has happened to. For everyone it might happen to in the future if nothing changes." Foster's expression remained professional, but a gleam of approval showed in her eyes. "In that case, we need to move quickly. I've scheduled a press conference for noon today. Chief Edwards has indicated he wants to attend to show his support." Jasmine's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "The chief wants to support me publicly against his own officer. It appears that after seeing the evidence, Edwards is more concerned with justice than with protecting his department's reputation," Foster explained. "That's unusual in my experience, but certainly welcome." 2 hours later, Jasmine stood at a podium outside the hospital, the bright May sunshine feeling strangely at odds with the gravity of the moment. Microphones from every local news outlet and several national ones were positioned before her. Her grandmother and brother stood supportively at her side, while Alexandria Foster hovered nearby, ready to intervene if questions became too aggressive. "My name is Jasmine Washington." She began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I am a firefighter with the Westbrook Fire Department. 2 days ago, while responding to an emergency call, I was unlawfully detained, assaulted, and arrested by Officer Richard Calloway of the Westbrook Police Department." She recounted the events clearly and factually, describing Calloway's deliberate obstruction, his racist comments, and the escalation to physical violence. As she spoke, the crowd grew larger, with hospital staff and patients gathering at windows and doorways to listen. The equipment I was transporting was critical for the rescue operation at Police Chief Edwards' residence, where his 16-year-old daughter Maya was trapped by fire. Due to Officer Calloway's actions, that equipment never arrived, and Maya Edwards suffered severe smoke inhalation that has left her in critical condition. Jasmine paused, gathering herself before continuing. This incident is not isolated. It is part of a pattern of discriminatory treatment that many Black first responders and citizens face. Today I am calling for justice not only for myself but for our entire community. No one should face violence and discrimination from those sworn to protect and serve, especially not while performing their duty to save lives. As she finished, a murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Chief Marcus Edwards was approaching the podium, still in the same rumpled suit he'd worn for the past 2 days, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. The press immediately began shouting questions, cameras flashing rapidly, but Edwards raised a hand for silence. "I am here today not primarily as police chief, but as Maya's father," he began, his deep voice carrying easily across the hushed crowd. 2 days ago, my daughter nearly died because a dedicated firefighter was prevented from doing her job by an officer under my command. An officer with a history of complaints that should have been addressed long before it came to this. The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled media. It was unprecedented for a police chief to so openly acknowledge fault within his department. I have reviewed the evidence, including Officer Calloway's body cam footage and witness statements. What happened to Firefighter Washington was not a misunderstanding or a procedural error. It was assault, it was racist, and it nearly cost my daughter her life. Edwards turned slightly to face Jasmine directly. "Miss Washington, I want to publicly apologize to you for the injustice you suffered while trying to save my child. The department I lead failed you, and through you failed my daughter and this community." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, bringing tears to Jasmine's eyes and to many in the crowd. Edwards turned back to the press. "Effective immediately, Officers Calloway and Parker have been suspended without pay pending criminal charges. I have requested an independent investigation into this incident and a comprehensive review of our department's policies and practices regarding use of force and racial bias." The press conference exploded with questions, but Alexandria Foster smoothly took control, directing which reporters could speak and shutting down inappropriate inquiries. As the event concluded, Jasmine found herself face-to-face with Chief Edwards, away from the microphones. "How is your daughter?" she asked, the question that had been weighing on her since the incident. Improving. Edwards replied, a cautious hope in his tired eyes. "The doctors are optimistic. They're reducing her sedation today." He hesitated, then added, "She would like to meet you when she's stronger, if you're willing." Jasmine nodded, touched by the request. "Of course. I'd like that too." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Westbrook became the focal point of a national conversation about race policing and public service. Jasmine's story was featured on news programs and talk shows across the country. At first, she had been reluctant to step into the spotlight, but Alexandria Foster had helped her see that her voice could drive meaningful change. The city itself was deeply divided. In East Westbrook and other minority neighborhoods, Jasmine was hailed as a hero who had exposed the racism embedded in the city's institutions. In more affluent, predominantly white areas, reactions were mixed. Some residents openly supported the call for police reform, while others defended the department and suggested the incident was being blown out of proportion. The police union moved quickly to protect Officer Calloway, hiring high-profile defense attorney Victor Hammond to represent him. Hammond was known for his aggressive tactics and his success in defending officers accused of misconduct. At his first press conference, Hammond painted Calloway as a dedicated officer who had been villainized for following standard procedures. Officer Calloway was performing his duty to ensure public safety by inspecting emergency equipment, Hammond declared to assembled reporters. Any physical force used was in response to Firefighter Washington's non-compliance with lawful orders. This case is being exploited by anti-police activists and politicians looking to score points with certain communities. The statement infuriated many, particularly when contrasted with the clear evidence from body cam footage and witness videos. But Hammond's tactics were effective in rallying support from police unions nationwide and conservative media outlets. Within the police department itself, a clear division had emerged. Many officers, particularly veterans who had worked alongside Calloway for years, closed ranks around him, viewing the charges as an attack on all law enforcement. Others, especially younger officers and officers of color, supported Chief Edwards' actions, recognizing that Calloway's behavior damaged the reputation and effectiveness of the entire department. Officer James Diaz, whose testimony had been crucial in building the case against Calloway, faced immediate retaliation. His locker was vandalized, he was excluded from shift briefings, and he received anonymous threats. Despite this, he remained firm in his stance, becoming an unexpected ally in the fight for accountability. 2 weeks after the incident, Jasmine still hadn't returned to work. Her physical injuries were healing, but the psychological impact lingered. Night terrors plagued her sleep, and panic attacks struck when she saw police vehicles. The department psychiatrist had diagnosed her with PTSD and recommended extended leave. Lieutenant Rodriguez visited her home regularly, bringing updates from the station and assurances that her position would be waiting whenever she was ready to return. "The crew misses you," he told her during one visit sitting in Gloria's small living room where Jasmine had temporarily moved back in to be closer to her grandmother's support. "They ask about you every day." Jasmine nodded but couldn't bring herself to commit to a return date. The thought of putting on her uniform again, of responding to emergencies where she might encounter police officers, filled her with dread she couldn't shake. "What if I can't do it anymore, Lieutenant?" she finally asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if he took that from me too?" Rodriguez leaned forward, his expression serious. "Then we'll deal with that." "But I don't think he did." "You're the strongest firefighter I know, Washington. This is a setback, not the end of your story." Across town at Westbrook General, Maya Edwards was making remarkable progress. After 5 days in a medically induced coma, she had been gradually awakened and weaned off the ventilator. Her lungs had sustained damage that would require ongoing treatment, but her youth and previous good health were working in her favor. She sat up in her hospital bed, scrolling through news articles about the incident on her tablet, while her father dozed in the chair beside her. The door opened quietly, and a nurse entered with medication. "How are you feeling today, Maya?" she asked, checking the girl's vitals. "Better," Maya replied, her voice still raspy from the ventilator tube. "Dad says the firefighter who was supposed to bring the rescue equipment might visit soon. Jasmine Washington." "Have you met her?" The nurse nodded. "Everyone in the hospital knows Miss Washington now. She's become quite the symbol of resistance." Maya looked over at her sleeping father, his face finally peaceful after weeks of anguish and exhaustion. "He's taking a lot of heat for supporting her, you know. The mayor called yesterday, tried to get him to tone down his criticism of the department. Dad told him to shove it." She said this with unmistakable pride. "Your father is a brave man," the nurse agreed. "Not many in his position would have the courage to stand up to their own department." Maya turned back to her tablet, bringing up a picture of Jasmine at the press conference, her injured face, a stark testament to what she had endured. "I want to thank her," she said softly. "Not just for trying to save me, but for being willing to fight afterward. Dad says sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving the crisis, it's having the courage to demand justice afterward." The nurse smiled. "Sounds like your father's wisdom is rubbing off on you." Later that week, Alexandria Foster called an emergency meeting with Jasmine, Chief Edwards, and several community leaders. They gathered in a private room at Foster's downtown office, away from media scrutiny. "The district attorney is wavering on pressing charges against Calloway Foster," announced without preamble. "He's concerned about the political implications and the difficulty of winning a case against a police officer." Edwards slammed his fist on the table. "That's unacceptable. The evidence is overwhelming." Foster nodded. "It island. But you know as well as anyone how rarely officers are successfully prosecuted, regardless of evidence." which is why we need to increase public pressure while simultaneously pursuing federal civil rights charges. She turned to Jasmine. This is where you come in. Your story has resonated with people across the country. We need to harness that attention to keep the pressure on the DA and to push for departmental reforms that will prevent this from happening again. Jasmine took a deep breath, still uncomfortable with her newfound public role, but increasingly convinced of its necessity. What do you need me to do? As the meeting concluded, Jasmine found herself walking alongside Chief Edwards through the downtown streets. "How are you holding up?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Jasmine considered the question seriously. "Some days are better than others. The nightmares are the worst part." Edwards nodded in understanding. Maya has them too. Wakes up, gasping for air, thinking she's still in the fire. They walked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've seen racism in the department, experienced it myself. But I always believed the best approach was working within the system, making incremental changes." He shook his head. "I was wrong. Or at least that approach wasn't enough. It took nearly losing Maya to make me see that." Jasmine glanced at him. "And now? Now, I understand that sometimes the system needs to be challenged, not just reformed. That's what you've done, Miss Washington. You've forced this city to confront truths it's been avoiding for generations." As they parted ways, Jasmine felt something she hadn't experienced since the incident, a sense of purpose. The fight ahead would be difficult, with powerful forces aligned against them. But for the first time, she believed that real change might be possible and that her suffering might serve as a catalyst for that change. And in that belief, she found the first fragile beginnings of healing. 4 months after the incident that nearly claimed Maya Edwards' life and thrust Jasmine Washington into the national spotlight, the grand jury proceedings against Officer Richard Calloway finally began. The Westbrook County Courthouse was surrounded by media vans and divided crowds of protesters, some demanding justice for Jasmine, others supporting Calloway and the police department. Inside the austere granite building, Jasmine sat in a small witness preparation room with Alexandria Foster, reviewing her testimony one final time. "Remember, just tell the truth exactly as it happened." Foster advised her calm confidence, steadying Jasmine's nerves. "The evidence supports your account. The body cam footage, the bystander videos, the radio logs, the witness statements, all corroborate your experience." Jasmine nodded, smoothing down the conservative navy blue suit she'd chosen for her testimony. In the months since the assault, her physical wounds had healed, though a small scar remained above her eyebrow, a permanent reminder of that day. The psychological healing had been slower, marked by therapy sessions, support groups with other first responders who had experienced trauma, and the unwavering support of her family and colleagues. The grand jury proceedings were closed to the public, but details inevitably leaked to the press. Jasmine's testimony was powerful in its straightforward recounting of events, free from embellishment or emotional appeals. Officer Diaz testified about the culture within the department that had enabled Calloway's behavior, revealing text messages and conversations that painted a disturbing picture of systemic racism. Chief Edwards' testimony perhaps carried the most weight, coming from the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city and the father of the young woman who had nearly died as a result of Calloway's actions. After 2 weeks of testimony and deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments against Calloway on multiple charges: assault, official oppression, civil rights violations, and reckless endangerment. Officer Parker was indicted as an accessory, and Sergeant Miller faced charges related to the cover-up attempt. The indictments sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community nationwide. While officers had occasionally faced charges for the most egregious incidents of brutality, it was almost unprecedented for an officer to be indicted for obstructing another first responder during an emergency. "This is just the first step," Alexandria Foster reminded Jasmine as they left the courthouse after the indictments were announced. "The criminal trial will be challenging, and we still have the civil case to pursue. But today is a victory worth celebrating." Indeed, the indictments catalyzed a broader examination of the Westbrook Police Department's practices. Chief Edwards, now fully committed to meaningful reform rather than incremental change, had initiated a departmental-wide review led by an independent panel of civil rights experts, community leaders, and law enforcement professionals from other jurisdictions. The panel's preliminary findings were damning a pattern of racial disparities in arrests' use of force and internal discipline, inadequate training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques, and a promotion system that rewarded aggressive policing tactics while overlooking community engagement skills. The mayor and city council, initially reluctant to wade into the controversy, found themselves unable to ignore the mounting evidence and public pressure. A series of emergency sessions resulted in the allocation of funds for body cameras for all officers, the establishment of a civilian oversight board, with genuine authority and mandatory training on racial bias and proper interaction with other emergency services. Throughout this period of institutional soul-searching, Jasmine struggled with her own future. The question that had haunted her since the assault remained: could she return to the job she had once loved so deeply? The PTSD symptoms had improved with therapy, but the thought of responding to emergencies where police might be present still triggered anxiety. Lieutenant Rodriguez had kept her position open, assuring her that the department would accommodate whatever she needed to return safely. One afternoon in late September, Jasmine received an unexpected visitor at her grandmother's house. Maya Edwards stood on the porch looking much healthier than the last time Jasmine had seen her at the hospital 2 months earlier. At 17, Maya carried herself with a poise beyond her years, likely developed through her recent experiences. "Miss Washington, I hope it's okay that I stopped by. My dad gave me your address." Jasmine invited her in, curious about the purpose of her visit. They sat in the small living room, Gloria bringing them lemonade before discreetly retreating to give them privacy. "I wanted to thank you personally." Maya began, her voice still carrying a slight rasp from the damage to her lungs. "Not just for trying to save me that day, but for everything you've done since. The changes happening in the department, in the city. None of that would be happening without you standing up." Jasmine shook her head. "Your father is the one who took the biggest risk, going against his own department, pushing for real change." Maya smiled. "Dad says the same about you, that you had the courage to speak truth when it would have been easier to take a settlement and stay quiet." She hesitated, then continued. "I also wanted to tell you something else. I've decided what I want to do after I graduate next spring. I'm going to become an EMT." The announcement caught Jasmine by surprise. An EMT. After everything that happened, Maya nodded firmly. "Because of everything that happened, I was saved by first responders who risked their lives even without the right equipment. And I saw how one person with courage like you can change an entire system. I want to be part of that change." The conviction in the young woman's voice struck something deep within Jasmine, a chord that resonated with her own initial calling to become a firefighter. For the first time since the assault, she felt a familiar spark, a reminder of why she had chosen this path in the first place. The next morning, Jasmine called Lieutenant Rodriguez. "I want to come back," she said simply. "Not sure I'm ready for full duty yet, but maybe I could start with the community outreach program while I continue training." The relief and joy in Rodriguez's voice was evident. "That's fantastic, Washington. The kids at East Westbrook Elementary have been asking about you, and the new recruits could really benefit from your experience." Her return to Station 17 was marked by a moment she hadn't anticipated. As she walked through the bay doors in her uniform for the first time in 4 months, the entire crew stood waiting, breaking into spontaneous applause when they saw her. Davis, Chen, Sullivan, Rodriguez, and all the others, including several new faces, welcomed her back with an outpouring of support that brought tears to her eyes. The famous Jasmine Washington, one of the new recruits, said with obvious admiration, "It's an honor to serve with you." The comment made Jasmine uncomfortable. "I'm just a firefighter doing my job like all of you," she insisted. Rodriguez put a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You're more than that now, whether you want to be or not. But here in this station, you're still just Washington to us." That balance between her public role as a symbol of resistance and her professional identity as a firefighter would prove challenging to maintain in the months that followed. As Calloway's criminal trial approached, media interest in her story resurged. Alexandria Foster helped her navigate the attention, preparing her for testimony while protecting her privacy as much as possible. The trial itself was a grueling 3-week ordeal. Defense attorney Victor Hammond employed every tactic to discredit Jasmine and shift blame, attempting to portray Calloway as a dedicated officer who had followed proper procedures in the face of non-compliance. But the evidence, particularly the body cam footage and Officer Diaz's testimony about the department's culture, proved too compelling to dismiss. When the jury returned after 2 days of deliberation, the courtroom was packed and utterly silent. On the count of assault in the 2nd degree, we find the defendant Richard Calloway guilty. The forewoman continued through the charges: guilty of official oppression, guilty of civil rights violations, guilty of reckless endangerment. Officer Parker was convicted on lesser charges, while Sergeant Miller accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony about departmental practices. The verdicts represented something vanishingly rare in American jurisprudence: actual consequences for a police officer who had abused his power. The civil case was settled shortly thereafter, with the city agreeing to substantial damages for Jasmine and committing to a legally binding consent decree that mandated specific reforms within the police department. 1 year to the day after the incident, Jasmine stood in full-dress uniform at a community center in East Westbrook. Chief Edwards had established the center as part of his reform initiatives, creating a space where police officers, firefighters, and community members could build relationships outside of crisis situations. The occasion was the inaugural meeting of the Westbrook Public Safety Community Oversight Committee, a diverse group of citizens, empowered to review departmental policies and practices. Both Jasmine and Edwards had been appointed as founding members, bringing their first-hand experience to the committee's important work. Officer Diaz, now promoted to training officer despite the initial backlash he had faced for his testimony, was there as well, developing new protocols for police interaction with other emergency services. As Jasmine surveyed the room, filled with people committed to creating a more just system, she reflected on the painful journey that had brought them to this point. The changes weren't perfect, and resistance remained within parts of the department, but real measurable progress had been made. Maya Edwards approached now, a certified EMT student doing her clinical rotations. "Miss Washington, they're ready for the presentation whenever you are." Jasmine nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping to the podium. The audience quieted as she began to speak about her experience and the lessons it had taught her about institutional change, courage, and the long road toward justice. "A year ago, I wasn't sure I would ever wear this uniform again," she admitted. "Officer Calloway took many things from me that day, but he didn't take my commitment to service. If anything, this experience has deepened my understanding of why first responders of color must be visible, must be heard, must be protected." From the back of the room, her grandmother Gloria watched with tears of pride in her eyes. Beside her sat Lieutenant Rodriguez and the crew from Station 17, who had supported Jasmine through every step of her recovery and return to service. When the formal proceedings concluded, Chief Edwards presented Jasmine with the city's highest civilian honor, the Westbrook Medal of Courage. For exceptional bravery in the face of injustice and for turning personal trauma into positive change for our entire community, he announced, placing the medal around her neck. Later, as Jasmine was preparing to leave, Maya Edwards approached her once more. "I have something for you," she said, holding out a small box. "Dad and I wanted you to have this." Inside was a silver pendant in the shape of a phoenix, rising from the ashes, Maya explained. "That's what you did. That's what we all have to do." Jasmine closed her hand around the pendant, feeling its weight and meaning. "Thank you," she said, simply, words inadequate for the complex bond they now shared. The next morning, Jasmine responded to her first emergency call since returning to active duty. As Engine 17 raced through the streets of Westbrook, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the focused determination to help whoever was in need. When they arrived at the scene, a multi-vehicle accident on the highway, she saw police officers already present, securing the area and directing traffic. For a moment, the old anxiety flared, but then she recognized Officer Diaz among them. He nodded respectfully, as the firefighters deployed a simple acknowledgement between professionals with a shared commitment to public service. Working alongside her crew, Jasmine helped extract an injured driver from a crushed vehicle, her training and experience guiding her actions with precision and care. As the patient was loaded into the ambulance, Jasmine caught sight of her reflection in a car window. The scar above her eyebrow was barely visible now, but she knew it would always be there, a reminder of both trauma and transformation. 1 year later, at the second annual Public Safety Community Awards, Maya Edwards, now a fully certified EMT, stood at the podium presenting the Jasmine Washington Courage in Service Award to its namesake. The award had been established to recognize first responders who demonstrated exceptional courage in challenging systemic injustice. Ms. Stone, Washington showed us that true heroism isn't just about rushing into burning buildings, Maya told the audience. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the cost is high. Her actions not only changed our police department, but inspired changes in departments across the country. As Jasmine accepted the award, she looked out at the diverse faces before her, including many young Black and brown first responders who had been inspired by her story to pursue careers in emergency services. The painful journey had led to this moment of transformation, not just for her, but for an entire community. The work continues, she reminded them in her acceptance speech. Justice isn't a destination we reach once and for all. It's a path we must choose every day in how we treat each other, in how we hold our institutions accountable, in how we respond when we witness injustice. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Jasmine, but for all those who had contributed to the changes in Westbrook. Chief Edwards, who had risked his career to do what was right; Officer Diaz, who had broken the blue wall of silence; the community activists who had maintained pressure for reform; and countless others who had refused to accept the status quo. As Jasmine looked across the room at Maya Edwards now, a confident young woman dedicated to saving lives, she felt a sense of completion. The system that had allowed a racist officer to assault her while a young girl's life hung in the balance had been transformed not perfectly but significantly. And in that transformation lay the hope that such an incident would never happen again, that the next generation of first responders would serve in a more just and equitable environment than the one she had faced. Have you been moved by Jasmine's journey from victim to catalyst for change? If this story made you think about the importance of standing up against injustice, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more powerful stories of Courage and transformation. Comment below with your thoughts on how one person's bravery can create ripples of change throughout an entire community. Would you have had the strength to fight for justice like Jasmine did, even when facing powerful opposition? Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to speak truth to power. And thank you for joining me on this emotional journey, through pain, perseverance, and ultimately progress. This powerful story reminds us that systemic racism persists even for those wearing uniforms dedicated to public service. Jasmine's experience illuminates how prejudice can endanger lives when bias overrides judgment, showing the devastating ripple effects of discrimination. The story teaches us that courage comes in many forms. Jasmine's resilience in facing injustice, Chief Edwards choosing integrity over institutional protection, Officer Diaz breaking ranks to stand for truth, and Maya finding purpose through trauma. We learn that meaningful change requires both individual bravery and collective action. Neither alone is sufficient. Justice isn't achieved through silence or acceptance of incremental progress, but through confronting uncomfortable truths and demanding accountability. The transformation of Westbrook's institutions demonstrates that systems can change when enough people refuse to accept the status quo. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals that healing from trauma often comes through fighting for others, turning personal pain into collective progress. Jasmine found her way back to her calling not by forgetting what happened, but by ensuring it wouldn't happen to others. Her journey teaches us that true heroism isn't just saving lives in burning buildings, but having the courage to stand up against injustice, even when the personal cost is high. Has this story of courage in the face of injustice touched your heart? If you've ever witnessed discrimination or stood up against unfair treatment, share your experience in the comments below. Have you seen instances where someone in authority misused their power based on prejudice? How would you have responded in Jasmine's impossible situation? Comment justice if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin color or background. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story moved. You subscribe for more powerful narratives that expose difficult truths, and share this video with someone who needs to understand the real impact of racial discrimination in our society. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Jasmine's transformation from victim to catalyst for change. Remember, your voice matters in creating a more just world for everyone. Stay strong, stay compassionate, and never stop fighting for what's right.